Welcome to the Nonprofit Exchange Podcast. Stories by leaders for leaders to help you raise the bar on your own excellence, to release the potential inside of you. Now, here's today's podcast.
Hey there. Welcome to the Nonprofit Exchange. This episode is, every episode's packed with adventure, packed with really creative thoughts. If you're stuck, we're going to help you get unstuck. If you think it's the end of the world, there's no hope, there's opportunity. There's a silver lining. And our guest today is Alise. It's spelled with an A, A-L-I-S-E. And she's going to talk about the silver lining, the chance to reinvent the workplace. Now, this probably applies to anybody that leads anywhere. But there's a unique opportunity right now for those of us that are in the social benefit space, the charity, nonprofit, whatever we call ourselves, but we're doing the work that's important today. So Alise Cortez, welcome to the Nonprofit Exchange, and please take a minute, tell people a little bit about you and why do you do what you do? What's your passion?
Hello, Hugh. Thank you so much for having me. Be glad to do that. Thank you. So why the nonprofit space? First, let me say that I have spent, let's call it close to probably 10 years serving on various nonprofit boards here in Dallas and really helping to support those initiatives. I got to serve as the president of an organization called Lakewood Service League, which has 125 East Dallas women devoted to supporting about 36 different nonprofits here in the area. And then I was the chairman of the board of the YMCA here at White Rock during a time when we were raising $14 million for a new building, and just really got the love of the nonprofit space. And then, of course, from there, because of that service, it gave me an opportunity to just stand in a place where I could then consult with other nonprofits as clients, which I did later. So what do I do professionally is the easiest way to think of me as a management consultant, and I specialize in the meaning and purpose space. I've been doing that kind of work cumulatively for about 20 years. And what I love about it, Hugh, so much is it's a pure joy and a privilege to literally stand when I'm working with someone, a leader or an organization, and literally before my very eyes, watch them grow. That is the most amazing thing to get to behold. So the work entails doing leadership development, employee engagement kind of work, culture kind of work. I created my own leadership program called Vitally Inspired, Living and Leading from Purpose. So that's a little bit of what I do professionally, a little bit of why I love nonprofits.
Purpose. And your banner on your website, Live with Passion, Work on Purpose. That's lovely. I couldn't fit it into the space on my site, but I'll put it in the space. So you find her at ALISE Cortez, alisecortez.com. It's like you're going to write Alice, but it's Alise. And you're a unique individual. And the first time I met you, the passion for what you do really comes through your being. You're very focused. So how did you come about this live with passion, work on purpose, that tagline? How did that come to you?
Yeah, thank you, Hugh. The whole tagline is live with passion, work on purpose, and lead with inspiration. It's evolved over the years, right? Like so many things have for people, and as I picked up more and more steam. So one of the great things that happened, and I'll say it's nice to be on the other side of the mic, by the way, Hugh, because one of the things that I've been doing to ongoing develop myself is hosting my weekly Working on Purpose radio show, which I'm looking forward to having you on as a guest shortly. That program for me, Hugh, is a catalyzing force. So it's about, I've got, as of today, it's 281 episodes that I have created and hosted. And the preparation for those shows, I usually entails reading a whole entire book and then preparing for the conversation. So I get to bake into my being the knowledge that comes from preparation and the conversation that I have with the guest. So over the years, when I first started that program, Hugh, I started it in February of 2015. And what I wanted to do on the heels of having finished a large postdoc research on meaning and work and identity, what I wanted to do was, and did for about a year and a half, was showcase guests that were working with passion. So I brought on guests who love what they did, and it was just dripping from the walls, and it was inspiring and interesting to hear how they had persevered to stay doing what they were doing. And then over time, it became more about really showcasing inspiration, how to showcase what do I think is inspiring that might be inspiring to somebody else. And then most recently, the last year and a half has really been focused on the purpose space, having people that are talking about doing their work from purpose or on purpose, and how organizations increasingly are executing and operating from their purpose in a way that allows their employees to align with that purpose. And so that's such a dynamic force when everyone's aligned and everyone's working for the same trajectory. So it started, I would say, 20 years ago when I began researching the meaning of work and identity space, and it's just continued to evolve and grow. And I do believe I am living my purpose. The divining rod just kept me going along all those years, and I kept opting into specific work. Almost like there were times when I was like, this doesn't really make sense for me to do this, but I'm going to obey this anyway, and I'm going to do it. And that's how the space of meaning and purpose and inspiration has unfolded today for me.
On the homepage of your site, there's this graphic, and a lot of people do, me included, quotes from everybody else, and they never quote themselves. I do that in my blog posts and the articles I write, but you got it smack dab on your site with a picture of you in some really fancy place having a tea party. It looks like do what you love or something on the cup. But your quote there, you call yourself a speaker and purpose engagement catalyst. I love that. And so here's what you say: the key to long-term productivity, fulfillment, and success in today's competitive marketplace is to embrace a lifelong habit of learning, inquiry, and growth that accentuates and challenges the way you think, approach life and work, and ultimately act. Yo, that's a mouthful, but it's pretty complex. It would take me a while to unpack that. So I'm going to put the web link on the page. I'm going to paste it into the Zoom right now, but we do have your picture and stuff automatically go to your website, but if I haven't already, I will put your web link there. So let's get to this. We're recording this. Sometimes people listen to podcasts years later, but we're recording this in 2010. We're just at the beginning of the summer, just actually before official summer, the 16th of June. Next week is summer. But we're in the last part of this COVID-19, and we're coming out of it, we think, we hope. We pray that it's time to put our feet on the ground and do something. So what have you seen companies, or what are they grappling with during the pandemic and the sheltering that went with that?
I want to answer that, but if I can go back really quick to that quote that you mentioned, because that will undergird what I want to say as well. So part of that quote, which really speaks to the need for ongoing learning and development, is especially now in today's workplace, which is so incredibly competitive and driven by technology, artificial intelligence, robotics. Now more than ever, people need to continually retool and develop new skills and talents. So I wanted to position that first because, one, I mean, I do work in the learning space, and so obviously I believe in that. I do it for myself every single week, if not daily. So that is an important premise to stand on, is that we've in this pandemic, we've learned an awful lot, and we're going to learn even more as we go through it, I think, as individuals and as organizations. But what I'm seeing is what are people grappling with inside organizations? I'm still doing programs inside organizations, but now mostly virtually, still doing executive coaching. So a finger on the pulse as to what's going on for a lot of organizations. What's going well, I think, for organizations is they have discovered that, you know what, people can work remotely pretty handily. A lot of organizations were very resistant to that because they didn't feel maybe they could control or monitor the output of work by employees. And now in the pandemic and during the forced sheltering in place, they had no other choice but to do so. So I think what's been working well is that organizations have discovered how to better utilize technology to keep their employees productive and keeping the wheels moving on the bus down the road. That's one thing that's gone very well. I think also too, what's been a very interesting observation from my vantage point as a social scientist and a philosopher is that the perhaps unintended outcome that's also come from that is that people who are working from home have rediscovered those individual human beings that otherwise occupy their house that they didn't know before. Their significant other, their children, their dog, right? They didn't know who are these people, who are these beings. So that's been reestablished in a very different way. I love beyond measure, Hugh, sitting here in my office area, looking out my front window, and I watched parades of families going by, walking, riding their bikes, kids on the scooters, and it's delightful to see that reconnection and reestablishing of a family sort of unit that I think wasn't present before. So I think that's working toward helping some of the social disconnection and malaise that's happened. On the other side of that, which I know we haven't gotten to the things that aren't good yet, on the other side of that, I do recognize there are unions of people that are terribly fragmented, and being in close proximity to the person that you weren't sure you liked before the pandemic and now you're stuck with them is a little bit of a different matter, right, for some other people. And I want to recognize that that's no small thing. I also think that we've recognized that there's more. What's been good about this is organizations have recognized and begun to get present to a necessary, what I call work-life harmony. And because kids couldn't go to school, and they were being schooled from home virtually while their parents worked alongside them to be in the office or their work setting, what was discovered is conference calls naturally entailed the sounds of children laughing and people moving through the house and the dogs barking and such. Whereas before, those were supposed to be separate elements in life. You work and then you live someplace else. And the pandemic allowed us to be able to, because we were all forced at home, to thread those elements in, I think, a much more harmonious, productive, peaceful way, I think. And that organizations had to recognize that that was what was going to have to take place to keep things moving. So I think all that's good. Before I go into what I don't think is working, any comments or reactions or additions?
Well, I think there's a pivot, and this is where really effective leadership makes a difference. And leaders adapted right away that were capable and flexible. There's this thing going around called adaptive leadership. I think an effective leader does adapt to the situation. My area of leadership coaching is transformational leadership, which is about a culture of high performance and a high performing leader. But I think the pivot must happen from the leader. And when I look at the effective companies, well, the Fortune 500, there's only 53 of the original 500 that are still there because those leaders didn't adapt to what the current situation was. They just ran to the wall because they were doing things the way they always did them. Now, it's in what you're talking about, I've seen higher levels of productivity, higher levels of employee satisfaction when we don't have to do so many in-person meetings, and we're not wasting time traveling. So I think we've discovered something. We've really discovered which meetings could have been held by email anyway, and save time. But the Gallup surveys have shown for years that 70% of the workforce is either disengaged or actively disengaged. So employers were pretending they had control over people in the space when they really didn't. And there was that $500 billion of waste just in the productive part, not the leadership. And as we are talking to those who are leading charitable organizations, some are large, some are small, the burnout rate is huge because we're trying to cover so many bases. And this is a good chance, and as you go on, this is a good chance to reset the bar. And it really means that we as leaders need to step out and say, this is what we're doing. And so it's equipping ourselves. So I'm loving what you're saying, and we're at a pivot point, and it's important for leaders to step up. So yes, I'm tracking. I love it.
Great. So on the other flip side of maybe what's not going well, what are organizations and employees grappling with? Now, I started off by talking about the world of technology, artificial intelligence and robotics, et cetera. The other thing that I'm finding from talking to my clients and the reading that I'm doing to keep myself informed is that a major problem that's happening is that employees, even despite with all this technology available, they do not feel connected to one another. And that is such a crucial thing, to be able to feel connected to and belong to your fellow workers, your fellow teammates, and to be part of an organization that you're proud of and feel like you can align your purpose through. And because people their routines have been changed through sheltering in place and they're at home, they don't get the benefit of those meetings that can be incredibly interesting, meaningful interactions for them. The eyeball exchange, being able to laugh with somebody, being able to look across the table at your teammate and go, oh, I know what that person means. She's over there juggling her leg. I mean, she's nervous. And being able to enjoy that you could see that in the other person and help them through it. That part is missing for a lot of people. Even though we're doing video calls, the human connection element is very, very sadly and terribly missing. And it is contributing to well-being demise. There are greater instances of depression and anxiety and stress among people, both because they can't touch each other and work with each other, but also because they're dealing with other issues in the pandemic that have compounded on them. So it's really important that organizations recognize just how stressful and anxiety producing this time is for their employees and get them some help. There's a lot of organizations out there doing amazing work. A couple of them I've had on my radio show recently talking about how they help employees address well-being and mental health. So that's the big one. The first thing that I want to say is one thing that they're grappling with is that lack of meaningful connection. In fact, one of my clients just last week reached out and said, Alise, we're dying at the vine. What can you do? Can you do something for us for a virtual meeting, for a team building session? We feel so lost without each other and unmoored. So certainly that's one thing to talk about. I would say also too, what people are what they're grappling with, organizations are grappling with too, is obviously just the reduced, for many organizations, the reduced demand for their goods and services. And so what does that do for the bottom line, the operational piece? And then let's say back to your word pivot. All right, so we've identified we've got a severe reduction in revenue. What do we do now to divert our energies to do something else to produce other income? That's fantastic. And it's so exciting to see organizations innovate. And let's not forget that that's also really trying and challenging for the people that are set to the task of pulling that off. I know many organizations, Hugh, whose employees are working around the clock to be able to try to handle the pivot, right? And so just from the human vantage point of workload and stress and emotional anxiety, I would put those two things as really important items that need addressing by organizations and their leaders.
How often do you find that some of the major issues aren't visible to leaders, like blind spots? How often do you find that there's something significant that the leaders don't see, hence why they need you?
You know, I appreciate that question so much. I'll say in all candor, Hugh, if that phenomenon weren't epidemic, I wouldn't have the work that I do.
Wow.
Probably you wouldn't either, right? Think about that. Probably you wouldn't either. Because, right, to be human is to have an inordinate number of blind spots all the time, right? We all have them. No one is immune to it. The opportunity is to find consistent and constant ways to try to get present to them and understand their impact and how you could replace the blind spots and the behavior that comes with it with something much more productive and effective. So I think that for a lot of organizations, right, speaking to your point of blind spots, I think that they discovered the blind spot of, oh, we really can be productive working remotely. That's interesting, good to know. And the blind spot too of a lot of organizations, it's amazing, even if you work really hard at your culture to try to create a space where employees can feel empowered to speak their mind honestly, it's incredibly difficult to say something that may be perceived as hard news to a leader above you or to someone you respect and admire. There's just such a concern about hurting their feelings. And so finding ways to open that dialogue so people can actually learn about some of their blind spots is incredibly difficult. And I do think it helps sometimes to have a third party like you and I, or somebody else that holds up the mirror and shows what's going on. So blind spots are a real deal. And it's not that I don't want to add any negative charge to them because they are what they are. The opportunity though is to keep looking for them and keep getting present to what they are and what you can do about them.
Yes, and the mistake I hear is people say, I'm going to deal with it, I'm going to deal with it, which means I'm not going to deal with it. And that's one, they don't have the ability to say, okay, I need to learn something, or the willingness to say, I'm willing to be vulnerable and say, okay, what do I need to change? And and maybe don't have the awareness that there is actually something to change. I find that the top leaders I work with are vulnerable, are aware, and are willing. And those are necessary prerequisites. Now the burnout in the workplace has been excessive. Now we have a lot of people that are displaced in the workplace right now, and I see the job numbers are coming back, and so that gap may close, but they're going to go back in a different kind of workspace. And like you said, there's some opportunities for improvement here. The statistics for nonprofit leaders who overfunction drastically is the burnout rate is 45%, according to the Meyer Foundation study a few years ago. 45% of burnout leave. 75% are so stressed they're looking at the door, wanting to get out. Clergy, 1 in 10 make it to retirement. It's a very stressful job. And right now, when people are wanting different things and they can't meet, there's a whole lot of stress for clergy. So, centering, being focused on principles and moving into the conflict with meaningful conversation, but also being decisive. So let's talk a bit about what are the traits that a leader needs to have to be able to embrace some of these new ideas, to embrace some transformation in themselves. If we're going to transform systems, we have to start with ourselves. So what does a leader need to be able to do and to say to be able to make a change and take advantage of this very unique time in history?
What a great question. It's a beautiful question, very thoughtful question. There's so much that we could say to that, right? We could probably host another 10 episodes talking about that, what a leader needs in a time like this. But let me start with a few things that come directly to mind. One is they need a tremendous amount of empathy to recognize that this is really a very, very demanding time for their employees, and really, really being mindful and present to that there's so much chaos happening for people, and what the state that puts their employees into, the community that they serve, their customers, their investors, everybody, right? All of the stakeholder set. So I'd say first, a really strong amount of empathy. And I've seen some fantastic displays of this, Hugh, by organizations. For example, early on in the pandemic, I think it was Bank of America that had to lay off several of their employees. And the way that the leader did it, the way the CEO messaged that was so real, and it was authentic, and it was of tremendous concern. And if there was any other way that we could avoid doing this, we would. And that just goes such a long way at this time. And so that speaks to emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence has been identified as one of the critical factors that leaders need to continue to stoke and develop over the course of their lives to be effective. So empathy and emotional intelligence would be top of the list. I would also then have to throw in there a profound sense of curiosity. What is really happening here? What's so here? What do we have on our hands? What's working? What's not? And that means setting aside predisposed ideas about what they think. So what I think I know about the situation. So being ferociously curious, I think, is important. I also think that leaders have the job. What's a leader? Somebody who has followers, somebody who is depending on that person to set the direction and help them get through this terrible mess. So a leader needs other support, and they need somebody on a team or a crew of people to hold them up and keep them well conditioned for the cause that they've just found themselves in this pandemic, certainly. I'm working with several CEOs and leaders right now for that very reason, because this is really hard work to lead through something like this, right? You know that. So top of mind, those are just a few of the things that I would say. I guess I would also say that thinking strategically is really, really important. I just had a gentleman on my show a couple weeks ago named Patrick Bet-David. He's got a book out that speaks to the importance of business people, and that's including nonprofits and clergy, to think 5 moves ahead. So really thinking about, where is this going? If we take this next step, what are the ramifications that happen from that? If we take the next 6 steps, what are those? So strategic thinking, hugely, hugely important. Those are just some of the things that come to my mind. What about you?
It has been said that leaders live in the future. we see possibilities, we have a vision of what can be, then we move toward that vision. And in Napoleon Hill's work, he interviewed 500 of the top most successful leaders in the United States, and every one of them had what he called a definiteness of purpose. There was something good for humankind. They had definite purpose. They surrounded themselves with very successful people, and last and not the least of those was they always had a positive mental attitude. Failure was not an option. Now, we can walk into the walls, we can walk off a cliff when we're not skilled. So let's speak of the skill set. Now, some people kick around, oh, that person's a born leader. No, they're just bossy. I don't know about you, but I haven't found any evidence that anybody's born with leadership skills. It's a very, some people are born with musical skills, but I've got education. And it took some money and some time for me to build out my education so I could apply and grow my skills. I had some education in coaching, had education in leadership, I had education in meeting facilitation. So there's a lot of areas where I said, I want to learn. And you spoke earlier about keeping yourself prepared. So I want to tag on that. But before I forget, on your website, now, if people go to your website, there's a menu at the top, and one of them says radio. And so there's your radio show there. You referred to it a few times. So Alise, Alise Cortez.com, and then click on the link that says radio, and you'll be able to see the episodes of her show. And we started this series in 2014. So we're close to making history in the same amount of time. So let's talk about the traits of a leader. Now, you talked about emotional intelligence. That does not mean emotional decision making. We still want to make rational, thoughtful decisions. So talk about how we apply that emotional intelligence to leadership, how we build relationships, because the foundation of any leadership is relationships. So talk in that space just a minute, would you?
I just pulled up a document, and I'd be glad to do it. It is so timely, as I don't think we've talked about this yet, Hugh, but one of the things I'm doing that will come for me out of the pandemic, I'm going to have two things coming out of the pandemic, Hugh. One is that my first full-length book is done, and I already had it once sent to the publisher, and I'm now incorporating feedback back. The other thing is an elevated business model. So those are my gifts from the pandemic. But in the book that I'm writing, which is called Purpose Unleashed, How Inspirational Leaders Are Made, Inspire Passion and Elevate Cause. I have a section in there on purpose-inspired leadership. And what I say specifically is I'm out to help create inspired leaders, inspirational leaders. And so what do I mean by inspirational leaders is really there's about 7 characteristics that come with that particular model that I'm out to create. The first thing is that they express unnerving or unending positivity. They express and demonstrate gratitude for their team on a regular, ongoing basis, specific basis. They have a crystal clear vision for the future. They listen powerfully and generously. They communicate impeccably and are wonderful storytellers. And those storytellers are people that can really convey the quality and impact of the purpose of the organization and the contribution of each team member. So that is profoundly important. And 6th, they are trustworthy. We know who they are. They're authentic to us. They let us see their real person. So we trust that. And then last, they're passionate. They believe in what they're doing. And this is something that they love doing. It's not just, hey, I'm here to collect large amounts of stock options, an amazing paycheck, and to tell people what to do. But I am here because this is the greatest thing that I've ever been involved in, or at least it comes off that way. So to me, those 7 characteristics are what I'm out to help create in leaders.
Awesome. Uniquely enough, I have 10 points of what transformational leadership is, and every one of those is on my list.
Right?
With the addition of getting things off your plate. We don't know how to delegate, we don't know how to assign things, but it's so essential to be very clear about articulating your vision. I can't tell you how many leaders, both in the nonprofit space and the business space, who do not have a plan of action. They don't have a strategy. So how are people going to be engaged without a roadmap and assignments? And so I have all kind of excuses. We're talking to Dr. Alise Cortez on the Nonprofit Exchange. I'm going to talk about our sponsor here a minute, and then if you know somebody ought to be listening to this, get them, because we got some more. We're at the halfway point, and the really tough questions are coming up. So we're going to deal with the really hard stuff coming up. So invite somebody to join us, and you can see this as a replay on thenonprofitexchange.org, thenonprofitexchange.org. And our sponsor today is EasyCard. EasyCard is a virtual card that you can have for your nonprofit or your business or your speaker business or your author business, your consultant business, your coaching business. The Easy Card for Nonprofit Exchange is on the Center Vision Leadership. So we have the Nonprofit Exchange videos, and you click on that and you see today's episode with Alise. Now, to get this Easy Card, it's everything you need to know about Center Vision Leadership Foundation. Now, our website is a shell. Underneath is a community. It's a community of people like you working their best to change people's lives. And you can be a part of this community. You can try it out for $1. Then after that, it's just a little over $1 a day, and you get amazing resources targeted for what you need next. And then you have conversations with me and group members every week. So there's office hours, and we're just starting subgroups for clergy, some groups for cause-based charity, some groups for young philanthropists wanting to get started. So to get this card, it's an easy card, which means it's easy. Send a text to 64600. That's a number, 64600. And in the message, you put in the letters LDR and push send, and you'll get a link back. And then you'll have Center Vision Leadership Foundation always in the palm of your hand. And we will send you text updates for important webinars, important live events, important things that are happening that will impact your leadership, help you build your team, and help you create channels of revenue. So we're talking to Alise Cortez today about leadership, and specifically today, the title that she chose, and I've got to pull it up here, is COVID-19 Silver Lining, the Chance to Reinvent the Workplace. So Alise, what was the inspiration that led you to putting that title? Because you and I talked a few weeks ago, and you said, I'm thinking about what I want to talk about. But when I saw that, I said, whoa, she's spot on. So what was the inspiration behind creating that title for today?
Yeah, so as I really got, from the very beginning, Hugh, when this thing first hit us in the United States in March, I really got, wow, this is a major hard reboot, a forced restart. The earth has turned on its axis and it's not going to go back. So that means that we all need to respond to this in the most productive, effective way that we can. I mean, individually, as an organization, as a community, as a country, the whole thing, all in the world for that matter. And so for me, and you said this so beautifully at the beginning of our conversation, this is a beautiful thing to presence. You said that only 53 of the initial Fortune 500 companies were still on the list. And what does that speak to? And you said something about the other, 400 plus didn't really evolve. Well, all of life requires ongoing change and development. And those that are quick to change and adapt are the ones that survive and survive well and thrive. Those that are slow oftentimes don't make it or are at the bottom of the heap. So I look at this pandemic, Hugh, and COVID-19 as this is, if you miss the opportunity now as an organization, as an organizational leader, nonprofit, clergy, or even for-profit for that matter, if you miss the opportunity to take stock of what's gone on in your organization that has been going well and what needs to be changed, you have missed it. You missed the boat. You have missed an incredible silver lining in this pandemic to look at various ways that you can take your organization forward in a much more robust, productive, effective way that might make you even more viable than you were before the pandemic actually hit us. So that's where it came from. Is I looked at my own life, I looked at people around me, but immediately because I saw it as a forced reboot, well, to me, rebooting oftentimes, generally speaking, makes things better.
Pause. You know, it's a chance for people who want to step up to actually do that. You may or may not know that I served 40 years in different size churches up to mega churches as a music director. And the last three, I went there knowing that they were in crisis. And the last one, the bishop sent the preacher there to close down the church, and here he is hiring a staff for a high functioning staff. So we doubled the attendance at 3 different services, built 100,000 square foot state of the art auditorium, and had concert series with who's who of entertainers that could have been in New York or L.A. in Huntsville, Alabama. And so it was a challenge. Let's step up to what we're called to be. And we all have a calling, and it's there's some things that are working well, some things don't work. One of the people that spoke of Napoleon Hill earlier, one of the people he interviewed was Thomas Edison. And Thomas Edison said, well, I found out 9,999 things that didn't work, but on the 10,000th try, I invented the light bulb because I knew I could do it. And he was relentless. Now that was, I don't think many of us don't have that kind of stamina. He didn't sleep. He just took cat naps. So that's real dedication to a purpose and wanting to achieve something. And there are people who are ordinary people that stepped up to doing something really well and made a huge difference just because they weren't willing to cave in. And so what keeps people from, 100 people have an idea, only 3 people do it. And then not all of those will succeed. What do you think leaders need to embrace to be able to say, I'm going to do something and I'm going to do something differently? Now, we're talking to primarily people that are in the workspace we call nonprofit, whether it's a membership organization like a Chamber of Commerce or a cause-based charity or a church or synagogue. But that's a unique place to lead. And in many aspects, it's a lot more difficult than leading in corporate America where you have the leverage of a paycheck. Because we have these people, these volunteer people running around who want to find the passion, but sometimes we get in the way. So what keeps us from stepping into what we see?
Well, the first thing I want to say, and I'm dealing with it right now with a couple of the people that I'm coaching. So the first thing I want to say, and I want to speak to this just generically. I don't mean whether you're a leader or not. I mean just everybody out there in the world who's got a breath in their lungs right now, this applies to. And that is, what I stand for is to encourage and inspire people to speak their mind, use their voice, and ask for what they want and to presence what they see, especially if there's a solution attached to that. And very often, I don't care if you're the leader of the organization or if you just started last week and you're a volunteer, there is a reticence to speak up. Like you can see what's happening here, and it's very readily apparent what's going on here. But there is such a reticence to share what you're seeing and why you think that's important, what can be done about it, especially when it's wrong. So first I want to say that some of the people that I'm coaching, and this applies to any organization, talk about what they're starting to see. And what I've been telling them is, yes, and guess what? You're part of the reinvention strategy. You need to make sure and speak that observation and that set of ideological operatives back into the organization and make it become the future. So in that case, you can reinvent the workplace with that knowledge, but you need people, not just the leader, the whole organization weighing in on what they're seeing that would make a difference and create a more effective, positive, thriving future for the organization and themselves. So what leaders can do to encourage that and elicit that is to ask for that. Say, oh my gosh, I'm so clear that we can reinvent and recreate this organization to be more vibrant than it was before the pandemic. And I need every single one of you to weigh in with your thoughts, your observations, and how you think we can do this together. And then what happens is now you have an organization that's been built from the very team who's going to empower it. Because they helped create it and build it, they're in. They're engaged, they're involved. They want to see this thing through because they helped create it. And that is the most amazing way, I think, to be able to steward through this pandemic, coming through the other side so much stronger. But it does really require that solicitation from the leader to reach among their volunteers, their team, to get that information. And then they have to be careful about this, because if they already have an idea about how they think things should go, and the volunteers or the team doesn't provide input that aligns with that, there's a strong tendency not to listen to that. And now you've disempowered the workforce even worse. So that would be the first thing that I would say here is those employees, those volunteers, those people on the street, they do know what needs to be done. They know what's working, what's not working. The opportunity is for them to feel safe to be able to share their perspective and what they'd like to see going forward. And that's vastly missing for a lot of people.
As I understand Steve Jobs' work style was he was always walking around, touching things, talking to people, engaging people. So that was a relationship building. He may have been a hard person to work for, but he was very engaged and very active. And I think we tend to want to be behind closed doors and send emails when really we should be interfacing with people. So you've spoken often about coaching leaders. And one of the things that comes to mind is a necessary prerequisite. When I was conducting with some of the best conductors in the world, I went to Princeton and worked with a conductor there who had read his book, and he talked about being vulnerable. And he said, you cannot, when you're on a podium, by the way, podium's what you stand on, not what you stand behind, because it's foot. When you're on a podium in front of a choir and orchestra, you cannot make effective music unless you're vulnerable. Doesn't mean you're wimpy and cry. It means you are a lot of things, but you spoke about one of your principles was authentic, transparent, vulnerable. Brene Brown writes a lot on being vulnerable and does TED Talks on that. So talk about vulnerability and coaching. I find that a lot of people want to figure it out themselves. But what I noticed is the most successful people in any industry have a coach, and some have multiples in different areas. It's those that are going to figure it out that are still trying to get ahead. So the value of a coach, and so do you have to be vulnerable, and is it painful? Why do people need a coach?
Yes, I think every single human being on the planet needs a coach, and you especially need one or more if you're up to something. I have two, and I probably could use another 7. So I'm a firm believer in that approach to constantly challenge yourself, because that goes back to the blind spots we were talking about earlier in the conversation. Every one of us have blind spots, and they run us, and we don't even know it. And so a coach is someone who can first and foremost help put up the mirror as to how your blind spots and your mindset is actually running you, and is that what you want? Most of the time, there are aspects of that are not working well, and we have no idea. We're not at all conscious to that. So yes, I think having a coach at any level, especially as a leader that's in charge of an organization or in charge of a department, is a must. And you might change them over time and work with others, but somebody to help really grow you and challenge you and keep you conditioned, if you will, for leadership. And that goes back again to what we said before about the importance of, from my vantage point, of ever continuous learning and growing. There is no resting in today's world. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I would just encourage people to embrace the fact that working with a coach or taking any kind of ongoing learning or professional development is just part of the world we live in today. It should live on the level as, taking vitamins, eating and sleeping, like that. So for me, I consider that the show that I host every week a sort of a mini series of coaching for me, because the kind of people that I have on the show, when you come on the show, I'm going to extract as much knowledge as I possibly can from you and share with my listeners, right? So I'm consuming as well. I've had some amazing conversations on air, and pertinent to this conversation, one in particular that I want to share. I had Marcus Buckingham on my show back in early May. And for those of you who don't know who he is, he spent about 25 years working for the Gallup organization he started when he was 16 years old. And he went on and started some other ventures of his own. And he's a strengths proponent. And he's all about today. He's about stewarding a future inside organizations that allows where everybody is seen for their individual unique specialness. And that's brought out versus the bureaucratic way that so many organizations are run today, right? I see you smiling about this, right? So the only way to be able to just start to distinguish what does that look like is to get usually help and perspective from someone else, because it's really easy to default to what we think we should know and what has worked for us in the past, but that isn't necessarily going to take us into the future. So a coach or some kind of reference set to continually getting you to think about yourself, what's next, is, I think, an imperative.
I'm laughing because it's the equality myth. You know, you look at the orchestra members, they're unique. And so we keep saying, you know, we have people who are not old white guys in business. And so women say, I want equality. No, you don't want to dumb down to what old white men have done, the boomers. What you want to do, what you want is equity. What you want is an opportunity to use your stuff, not copy what we've done. So there's an opportunity for everybody, all of God's people, to come in with their unique skills and talents and make a difference. Because, you know, it's kind of screwed up, and that's my generation. So there's a really unique opportunity here for leaders to take hold of this and do something unique. And you look different than me, that's a good thing, because it's a chance for all God's people to do what they were created to do and be what they were created to be. So we're in the last few minutes of our episode. So you talked a little bit about what we do well and what we don't do well. Give us a couple of summary points on both sides of that. Now, people can go to thenonprofitexchange.org, find this episode. We can read the transcript. So all your bullet points will be there in written form so people can get the review. So give us a short list of what do we do well as leaders and what do we not do well?
Oh boy, again, that could be a whole other show in and of itself. But well, and again, it depends, right? There's a whole spectrum of leadership effectiveness, right? And I had the privilege of, in my career, of working with brand spanking new people that were leaving their individual contributor role to step into their first supervisor or manager role. That's one end. And then the other end is I've had the wonderful privilege of working with very, very seasoned and tenured CEOs that have been leading an organization with, you know, millions of dollars for a budget, and have been in such a capacity for several years. So there's a huge spectrum there, and I can't say from my vantage point that they all have something in common. But again, some of the things that I think leaders do well, or would be served to do well, goes back again to employing the emotional intelligence and the empathy, being effective communicators, and that they know how to be able to language and articulate the purpose of the organization and its direction and why somebody would want to be involved in that. That is so important today. Then, of course, being able to listen, being able to gather ongoing intelligence and to continually learn and grow, be willing to get constructive feedback from everyone and anyone, the 360 view, if you will. Very, very important. It's amazing how leaders don't really recognize just how intimidating they are, and how that intimidation factor can intervene in their effectiveness and their connection with their people. So being present to how to eradicate that or diminish that is so important. So those are some of the things that if I'm going to look at leaders doing something well, I'd add those behaviors to it. What they don't do well, or what I would like them to stop doing and consider exchanging for other more productive behaviors, would be, well, it's scary, right? So right now, there's a lot of leaders that, to your point earlier, they go in their office and they shut the door and just put out a bunch of emails because this is overwhelming. And I certainly respect and appreciate and empathize with that, which is all the more reason you need help. You cannot do this by yourself. So I think the leaders that get themselves in trouble do think that they can do it by themselves and are probably doing it very, very badly, or could do it much, much better. I suppose that another thing about the leaders not behaving or performing well would be that they're really considering the short-term game. So if I whack off, 25% of my employees or my team or the volunteers, whoever it might be, that's gonna serve today's short-term dilemma, but it might cut off your nose to spite your face for maybe 6 months down the road. Is there another way to achieve the same revenue or the same cost reduction plan? So short-term thinking definitely is something that I see that is a negative and a pull-down feature of some leaders that I've been witnessing and hearing about and reading in the news. And then finally, I guess I would say A lack of creativity and strategy, right? We talked about this before. This mirrors some of the things we talked about before, but not being creative enough or soliciting enough feedback or input about the direction of the organization and where it could actually go. Being mired in, well, this is who we are. This is what we do. Well, it's today's the new normal. That means that whatever mentality you stepped in the room with before this pandemic hit will not serve you to get through on the other side. So you've got to create something different. So I think those would be the two sides that I would offer just as a start.
Good list. Good list. I've heard the term kicked around. We're going to be in the new normal. I think we're going to be in the new radical. You know, we've got to do something
like that.
very different. I just thought of that. It just came to me. I saw Bob Hopkins' name pop up. So when I see Bob's name, it makes me think creatively. He's one of the most creative. So Alise, we're going to have another sponsor moment, and then I'm going to give you a chance to do a call to action, do a challenge. What do leaders need to do to step up to reinvent the workplace? Because it's up to us to lead the charge. And you were talking about vulnerability. I remember years ago, I coach a lot of work with a lot of power leaders. And this guy's saying, I'm going to my board, my executive team and board, and there's some things I don't do really well. How do I say that to them? And I said, well, just tell them. He said, I can't tell them I have weaknesses. Yeah, part of coaching is silence. And I said, you think they don't already know? So the next week he said, yeah, I told them this. And everybody said, oh, I can do that. And so we're not transparent. We're not honest. We're not authentic. We don't say, I've got the vision and you've got the skill. So we're doing this together. And by the way, if the organization succeeds, who looks good? Well, not only a leader, but everybody looks good. So we got a lot of celebration. So I want to talk about Easy Card is our sponsor here. But I told you about CenterVision's Easy Card, but I want you to get the philanthropy Easy Card. This means you have to learn to spell philanthropy. Bob Hopkins, who's the author of Philanthropy Misunderstood, he's quite a genius in inspiring, inspiring me. I'm an old guy, but inspiring young philanthropists. And on the 27th of June, 2020, we're having a philanthropy conference. And right here on the Easy Card, you get this Easy Card by texting the same number I gave you before. The number is 64600. Get your text out, put that number in. Down where it says message, type in philanthropy, PHILANTHROPY. It's a good spelling test. Okay, you get the card, you open this Youth Philanthropy Conference. There it is, first ever. Bob said, I had a dream that one day we would have a virtual International Youth in Philanthropy Conference. So it's a collaborative effort of CenterVision and Philanthropy Misunderstood. So get this Easy Card and find out what's going on. And you know what? Alise is going to be there, and there's going to be lots of other really good people there. But this is going to be led by young philanthropists who, I got to tell you, are quite remarkable. So thank you, Bob Hopkins. I'm sorry we're out of time. We're not going to be able to entertain questions from folks that are watching here. So Alise, as we're winding down, Easy Card is the sponsor for CenterVision. We're able to do our programs because we have sponsors who believe in us and enable us to do these good things. So get your own Easy Cards for your organization. We'll help you do that. Once you get yours, you can see how to get your Easy Card. Alise, what do you want to leave people with? You've given us a lot of good stuff, but what's your parting shot?
So you asked for me to give them a challenge. What I would challenge all listeners on this call, if you're leading a nonprofit, if you're a clergy, whatever it is you're leading, I really would encourage you, I challenge you to do an audit of all of your practices. Whether you do that yourself, you get somebody to donate their services to you or whatever it might be. I can help a few of you, certainly. But you really, this is an opportunity for you to really audit the operation of your organization. And I mean, that's how you recruit, that's how you onboard, that's how you bring employees on to develop them, recognize them, teach them. And when they move out on the backside too, how they even exit the organization. And that's just the human capital side of things. That's of course where I know how to help. But then operationally too, looking at how do you acquire your customers? How do you care for them? How do you solicit referrals? I mean, all those sort of things. I think, especially from a people vantage point, which is my world, doing an audit of your whole process end to end, I think is completely essential. And I've been offering this now to several organizations. I'm in conversations with a couple about starting that very work next week. This is your prime time to do this. Perfect time. That's my challenge. Do an audit.
Alise Cortez, it's been wonderful. Thank you for being on the Nonprofit Exchange today.
I loved every moment of it, Hugh. Thank you.